I learned to love him in silence, and in silence I learned to break. They say that a woman knows her place from the moment she draws her first breath, that fate is written in the hands that rock her cradle, in the walls that shelter her childhood, in the names she is taught to speak with reverence. I was born Clara Whitmore, daughter of a laundress and a groundskeeper, both of whom served the great house of Thornfield Hall before I could form my first words. My mother used to say that the stones of that estate knew our family's footsteps better than the roads of our own village, and perhaps she was right. We belonged to Thornfield the way ivy belongs to ancient walls, growing in the cracks, reaching toward light that was never meant for us. I was 14 when I entered service, a girl with calloused hands and a heart still soft enough to believe in kindness. The housekeeper, Mrs. Bramwell, looked me over that first morning with eyes that measured worth in posture and cleanliness, in the steadiness of one's gaze and the quietness of one's step. I must have passed her silent examination, for she handed me a gray dress and a white apron and told me I would begin in the kitchens, scrubbing pots until my fingers knew the shape of copper better than they knew my own face. Those early years blur together now, a procession of cold mornings and aching shoulders, of learning which floorboards creaked and which doors must never be opened without knocking thrice. I learned the language of service, the vocabulary of deference. Yes, my lady. Of course, my lord. I beg your pardon, I did not mean to disturb. I learned to walk along the edges of rooms, to press myself into corners when my betters passed, to exist as a function rather than a person. And for a long time, I believed this was all I would ever be. A pair of hands, a lowered gaze, a shadow moving through candlelit halls, noticed only when something was left undone. The old Duke was still alive then, a man I saw only from great distances, crossing the entrance hall or mounting his horse for a morning ride. He was tall and silver-haired, with the bearing of a man who had never questioned his right to command. His wife, the Duchess Helena, was another creature entirely. Where he was stern, she was sharp. Where he was distant, she was watchful. I feared her more than anyone in that house, for her eyes seemed to see through walls, through lies, through the careful masks we servants wore. She ran Thornfield with an iron will, and every girl below stairs knew that to displease her grace was to court disaster. Of the young master, I knew almost nothing. Edward Alexander Ashworth, heir to the dukedom, had been sent away to school before I arrived, and then to Oxford, and then to the Continent, for what the upper servants called his grand tour. His name floated through the house like a ghost, invoked in preparations for visits that never came, in rooms kept aired and ready for a son who preferred Paris to his ancestral home. I imagined him as a figure from the portraits that lined the gallery, handsome in the way of all aristocrats, cold in the way of all men born to power. I was wrong about so many things. The summer I turned 19, I was promoted to housemaid, a position that meant less work in the scalding kitchens and more in the elegant rooms above. I learned to lay fires without making ash scatter, to polish silver until it reflected like water, to change linens so smoothly that not a wrinkle remained. Mrs. Bramwell said I had good hands, careful hands, and perhaps that was why she assigned me to the East Wing when word came that the young master would finally return home. I remember the day he arrived. It was late June, the gardens heavy with roses, the air thick with the kind of warmth that makes linen stick to skin and tempers run short. I was in the library, dusting the higher shelves from a ladder, when I heard the commotion in the drive below. Carriages, horses, voices calling out welcomes. I should have descended immediately, should have made myself scarce before anyone important entered, but curiosity held me in place. I turned toward the window, cloth still in hand, and watched as a young man stepped down from the lead carriage. He was not what I expected. The portraits had shown me a boy, but this was a man grown, broad-shouldered and sure in his movements. His hair was dark, nearly black, and it fell across his forehead in a way that spoke of fashion or carelessness. I could not tell which. He wore traveling clothes, dusty from the road, and he stretched his arms above his head as if the journey had been tedious beyond bearing. And then, as if he felt my gaze upon him, he looked up, directly at me. I pulled back from the window so quickly that I nearly lost my balance on the ladder. My heart hammered against my ribs, though I could not have said why. He had not truly seen me, I told myself. The glass was old and warped. The light would have been wrong. He had merely glanced at the window, not at the servant girl perched foolishly above the bookshelves. I climbed down with shaking hands and fled the library before anyone could find me there. For the next several weeks, I did everything in my power to avoid the young master. It was not difficult. The house was large, and my duties kept me occupied in parts of it that rarely intersected with the family's movements. When I did glimpse him, it was always from a safe distance, across a crowded hallway or through a half-open door. He seemed to fill every room he entered, not with noise or demands, but with a presence that drew all attention toward itself. The other maids whispered about him constantly, how handsome he was, how he had spent 2 years in Italy studying art, how he rode every morning, alone, as if chasing something the rest of us could not see. I listened to their gossip and told myself I felt nothing beyond the ordinary curiosity that any servant might feel toward the master of the house. I told myself this lie so many times that I nearly believed it. The night everything changed was a Thursday in early August. A storm had rolled in from the west, one of those violent summer tempests that turn the sky green and set the windows rattling in their frames. I had been sent to secure the shutters in the conservatory, a task that left me drenched despite my best efforts to work quickly. By the time I finished, the storm had reached its full fury, and the servants' passage that would have taken me back to my quarters was flooded with rainwater pouring through a crack in the foundation. I had no choice but to take the long way through the main corridors of the east wing. I moved as quickly as I could, my wet shoes leaving prints on the polished floors that I would certainly be blamed for in the morning. Lightning flashed, filling the hallway with stark white light, and in that moment of illumination, I saw him. He stood at the far end of the corridor, outside the door to his own chambers, and he was watching me. I froze. Every instinct told me to lower my eyes, to mumble an apology, to disappear as servants were meant to do when caught in places they did not belong. But the storm had stripped something away from me, some layer of careful pretense, and I found myself meeting his gaze instead. He was in his shirt sleeves, his collar undone, a glass of something amber in his hand. His dark hair was disheveled, as if he had been running his fingers through it, and there was something in his expression that I could not name. Not anger, not surprise, something else entirely. "Forgive me, my lord," I managed at last. "The servants' passage is flooded. I did not mean to disturb you." He said nothing for a long moment. The thunder rolled overhead, shaking the very walls, and still he simply looked at me. Then he stepped forward, closing the distance between us, until I could see the amber flecks in his dark eyes, could smell the brandy on his breath, and something else beneath it, something warm and human that made my stomach tighten. "You are trembling," he said. It was only then that I realized I was. Whether from cold or fear or something else, my entire body had begun to shake. I opened my mouth to reply, to offer some excuse about the rain and my wet clothes, but before I could speak, he set down his glass on a side table and shrugged off his coat. "Here," he said, and draped it over my shoulders. The warmth of it enveloped me, the wool still holding the heat of his body, and I was so shocked that I could not move. No one had ever done such a thing for me. No one of his station would ever dream of it. I stared up at him, my lips parted, my mind empty of everything except the sensation of that weight upon my shoulders. "What is your name?" he asked. "Clara," I whispered. "Clara Whitmore, my lord." He repeated my name as if tasting it, and something flickered in his eyes. "Clara. You should get dry clothes before you catch your death. Take the coat back to the kitchens. Someone can return it to my valet in the morning." And then he turned and walked back to his chambers, closing the door behind him without another word, leaving me standing alone in that darkened corridor with the storm still raging outside and his coat wrapped around me like an embrace. I should have known even then that I was already lost. In the days that followed, I told myself that the encounter had meant nothing. He had been kind to a servant, nothing more. Men of his rank did not notice girls like me, not truly, and any warmth I had imagined in his eyes was merely a trick of lightning and my own foolish longing. I returned his coat through the proper channels and resumed my duties with renewed determination to be invisible. But he would not let me. It began with small things, a nod when we passed in the hallway, a lingering glance across the breakfast room as I served the tea. Once, when I was arranging flowers in the drawing room, he entered unannounced and stood watching me for several minutes before I even realized he was there. When I turned and saw him, my hands flew to my chest in surprise, scattering rose petals across the carpet. "Forgive me," he said. But he was smiling, and there was nothing apologetic in his tone. "I did not mean to startle you." I knelt to gather the fallen petals, my cheeks burning. "You honor me with your attention, my lord, but I am certain you have more important matters to attend to than watching a maid arrange flowers." He crossed the room in 3 strides and knelt beside me, his hand closing over mine before I could pick up another petal. "Do I make you uncomfortable, Clara?" The sound of my name in his mouth did something to me that I cannot adequately describe. It was as if he had reached inside my chest and taken hold of my heart directly. I looked at our hands, his so much larger than mine, his skin smooth where mine was rough from work. And I knew that I should pull away. I knew that nothing good could come from this. But I did not pull away. "You confuse me, my lord," I admitted, and the honesty of it surprised us both. He was silent for a moment, his thumb tracing a slow circle against the back of my hand. Then he released me and rose to his feet, offering his hand to help me stand. "I confuse myself," he said quietly. And then he left me there among the scattered roses, my hand still tingling where he had touched it, my heart beating so loudly that I was certain the entire house could hear. I know now that I should have asked for a transfer. I should have gone to Mrs. Bramwell and begged to be reassigned to another part of the house, to the laundry or the scullery, anywhere that would have put distance between myself and the young master. A wiser woman would have recognized the danger. A stronger woman would have resisted. But I was neither wise nor strong. I was 19 years old, and no one had ever looked at me the way Edward Ashworth looked at me, as if I were something precious rather than something useful, as if my presence brought him joy rather than mere convenience. I did not have words for what I felt then, only the sensation of standing at the edge of a great precipice, knowing that to step forward meant falling and wanting to fall anyway. The first time he kissed me was in the library where I had first seen him from the window. It was a rainy afternoon, the kind of gray day that turns the world soft and quiet, and I had been sent to dust the shelves while the family took tea in the drawing room. I thought I was alone. I was reaching for a book on the upper shelf when I felt hands at my waist, steadying me, and turned to find him standing so close that I could count his eyelashes. "I have tried to stay away from you," he said, and his voice was rough, pained. "God knows I have tried." I should have stepped back. I should have reminded him of his duty, of my station, of all the reasons why this was impossible. Instead, I placed my hand against his chest, feeling his heart pound beneath my palm, and said the truest thing I have ever spoken. Then stopped trying. He kissed me as if I were air and he had been drowning. I do not know how long we stood there, lost in each other, before the sound of footsteps in the corridor broke us apart. He pressed his forehead to mine, his breath ragged, his hands trembling where they still held my waist. "Meet me tonight," he whispered, "in the winter garden, after midnight." And though I knew it was madness, though I knew I was risking everything I had worked so hard to build, I nodded. That night, And so many nights after, I crept through the sleeping house to meet him among the frost-touched plants and the cold glass walls of the conservatory that had been converted for winter blooms. He brought blankets and candles and wine that I was too nervous to drink. He read me poetry in languages I did not understand and translated the words into kisses against my hair. He told me about Italy, about the paintings he had seen and the music he had heard, about his dreams of being something more than what his birth demanded. And he told me he loved me. I believed him. God help me, I believed every word. I did not know that elsewhere in the house, arrangements were already being made. I did not know that his mother had been in correspondence with the Hollingsworth family for months, that a match between Edward and their daughter Beatrice had been all but finalized. I did not know that the happiness I had found was built on sand, destined to wash away with the first tide. All I knew was that for one brief and shining season, I was loved, and foolish girl that I was, I thought that love would be enough. The night he told me it was over, the first frost had already touched the gardens, and I still did not know that I carried his child. The cruelest thing about betrayal is how ordinary the moment feels before it arrives. I remember that evening with the kind of clarity that pain bestows upon memory, every detail etched into my mind like words carved into stone. The leaves had begun to turn, painting the grounds of Thornfield in shades of amber and rust, and there was a bite in the air that whispered of coming winter. I had spent the afternoon helping to prepare the guest chambers, for the house was expecting visitors, names I did not recognize, faces that meant nothing to me. If I had known then what I would learn within hours, I might have paid more attention to the whispers among the upper servants, to the meaningful glances exchanged between Mrs. Bramwell and the butler. But I was lost in my own private happiness, counting the hours until I could slip away to meet Edward in our secret place. He sent word through one of the footmen that I was to meet him not in the winter garden, but in the folly at the edge of the estate, a small stone structure built to resemble a ruined temple, half hidden among the oaks. It was farther than we usually ventured, and I felt a flutter of unease as I made my way through the darkening grounds, my shawl pulled tight against the cold. But I told myself he had his reasons. Perhaps he wanted more privacy. Perhaps he had something special planned. I found him standing with his back to me, looking out over the ornamental lake that reflected the last light of sunset like a mirror of fire. He did not turn when he heard my footsteps, and that was my first warning. Edward always turned when I approached. He always smiled at the sight of me, as if my presence was a gift he had not expected to receive. "Edward," I said softly, and still he did not move. The silence stretched between us, heavy and terrible, and I felt something cold begin to spread through my chest. I walked around to face him, and what I saw in his expression made me want to run. His jaw was set, his eyes fixed on some point beyond my shoulder, and there was no warmth in him, none of the tender heat that had burned between us for months. He looked at me as if I were a stranger. No. He looked at me as if I were a servant. "I have something I must tell you," he said, and his voice was flat, rehearsed. "My engagement to Lady Beatrice Hollingsworth will be announced tomorrow evening. She and her family arrive in the morning. I heard the words, but they did not make sense. They were sounds without meaning, shapes that refused to form into anything I could understand. I stared at him, waiting for him to laugh, to tell me it was a poor joke, to take me in his arms and assure me that nothing had changed. He did none of these things. "Clara," he continued, and now there was something almost like impatience in his tone, as if my silence was an inconvenience. "What happened between us was a mistake. I allowed myself to be carried away by sentiment, and I have done you a disservice by letting it continue as long as it has. But you must understand that I have obligations, duties to my family, to my name. I cannot shirk them for the sake of a passing fancy." A passing fancy. The words struck me like a blow, and I felt myself stagger backward as if he had physically pushed me. All those nights in the winter garden, all those whispered promises, all those moments when he had held me and told me that I was different, that what we shared was real, that he would find a way for us to be together. Had any of it been true? Had I imagined the love in his eyes, conjured it from my own desperate wanting? "You said you loved me," I whispered, and I hated how small my voice sounded, how broken. Something flickered across his face then, a shadow of the man I thought I knew. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by that terrible blankness. "I was wrong to say such things," he replied. "I took advantage of your situation, and for that I apologize. But you must see that it could never have led anywhere. A man in my position does not marry a housemaid. The very idea is absurd. Absurd. A passing fancy. A mistake." Each word was a knife, and he wielded them with the casual cruelty of someone who had never been cut. I wanted to scream at him, to beat my fists against his chest, to force him to feel even a fraction of the pain that was tearing me apart. But I had been trained too well. Even in my anguish, I could not forget my place. I was a servant, and he was the master, and whatever had passed between us in the darkness of night meant nothing in the light of day. "I understand," I heard myself say, though the words tasted like ash on my tongue. "I wish you and Lady Beatrice every happiness, my lord." He flinched at my use of his title, the first crack in his careful composure. "Good," I thought savagely. "Let him feel something. Let him know that he has destroyed me." I turned and walked away before he could see me cry. I do not remember how I made it back to the house. I do not remember climbing the narrow stairs to the attic room I shared with 2 other maids, or undressing in the dark, or lying down on my narrow bed. I remember only the pain, vast and consuming, a grief so profound that it seemed impossible my body could contain it. I wept into my pillow until there were no tears left, and then I lay awake in the darkness, staring at nothing, feeling the pieces of my heart settle into new and jagged configurations. In the morning, I rose and dressed and went about my duties as if nothing had changed. What choice did I have? I could not afford to lose my position. I had no family to return to, no savings to sustain me, no skills beyond those of service. So I polished the silver and laid the fires and pretended that the sound of his voice in distant rooms did not make me want to shatter into 1,000 pieces. I pretended that seeing Lady Beatrice Hollingsworth, with her golden curls and her perfect porcelain complexion, did not fill me with a hatred so fierce it frightened me. She was everything I was not: wealthy, titled, beautiful in the way that aristocrats cultivated through generations of careful breeding. She laughed at Edward's jokes and touched his arm with easy familiarity, and he smiled at her, and I wanted to die. The engagement was announced at dinner that first evening, to the delight of both families. I stood in the corner of the dining room with the other servants, ready to refill glasses and clear plates, and I watched as Edward raised a toast to his future bride. His eyes never once found mine. It was as if I had ceased to exist entirely, erased from his world as easily as chalk from a slate. That night, alone in my bed, I pressed my hand to my stomach and wondered why I had been feeling so strange of late. The nausea that came each morning, the tenderness in my breasts, the bone-deep exhaustion that no amount of sleep could cure. I told myself it was grief making me ill. I told myself that heartbreak could manifest in the body as well as the soul. I told myself these lies for nearly 3 weeks before I could no longer deny the truth. I was carrying Edward Ashworth's child. The realization came to me in the laundry room, of all places, as I bent over a wash basin and felt the world tilt sideways. I barely made it outside before I was sick in the kitchen garden, heaving until there was nothing left, and then kneeling in the dirt with my arms wrapped around myself, trembling with terror. A baby, his baby. A child conceived in love that he had since declared a mistake, a passing fancy, an absurdity. I knew what happened to girls like me. I had seen it before. Servants dismissed without references, cast out to face the world alone with the evidence of their shame growing inside them. Some found work in factories or mills. Some turned to darker trades. Some simply disappeared, their fates too terrible to contemplate. And their children, if they survived at all, were born into poverty and disgrace, marked forever by the circumstances of their conception. I could not let that happen. I would not let that happen. But what choice did I have? I could not tell Edward. Even if I could bring myself to face him, even if I could find words for the impossible truth, what would it change? He had made his position clear. I was nothing to him. Our child would be nothing to him, an inconvenience to be managed, a problem to be solved with coins and silence. I would not beg for scraps from a man who had thrown away my heart, and yet the alternative was just as impossible. I had perhaps 2 months, maybe 3, before my condition became visible, before the other servants noticed, before Mrs. Bramwell's sharp eyes saw what I was trying to hide. And then I would be gone, thrown out into a world that had no mercy for fallen women. I spent those weeks in a fog of despair, going through the motions of my work while my mind raced in endless circles, seeking escape routes that did not exist. I thought about running away, but where would I go? I thought about finding someone in the village who might help me end the pregnancy, but the very idea filled me with horror. This child, however it had been conceived, was innocent. It was part of me. It was, God help me, part of him, the part that had been tender and true before the world had reminded him of his duty. I could not destroy it. I could not. And so I did the only thing I could. I waited for the axe to fall. It came on a Tuesday afternoon in late November. I was in the upstairs corridor, carrying fresh linens to one of the guest chambers, when a footman intercepted me with a summons. Her Grace the Dowager Duchess wished to see me in her private sitting room immediately. The linens nearly fell from my arms. In all my years at Thornfield, I had never been summoned to the Dowager's private rooms. She conducted all household business through Mrs. Bramwell, rarely deigning to speak to servants directly. For her to call for me by name could mean only one thing. She knew. I do not know how I managed to walk to her door. My legs felt like water beneath me, and my heart pounded so loudly that I could barely hear the sound of my own knock. When her voice called for me to enter, I had to grip the door handle to keep from fleeing down the corridor and out of the house entirely. Her sitting room was smaller than I had expected, intimate rather than grand, with heavy velvet curtains drawn against the gray November light. A fire burned in the grate, casting dancing shadows across walls lined with portraits of Ashworth ancestors. And there, in a high-backed chair beside the hearth, sat the Dowager Duchess Helena, her silver hair perfectly coiled, her black silk dress severe against her pale skin, her eyes fixed upon me with an expression I could not read. "Close the door," she said, "and sit down." There was a small chair positioned across from her, clearly placed there in anticipation of my arrival. I lowered myself into it, my hands clasped tightly in my lap to hide their trembling. I could not bring myself to meet her gaze. "Look at me, child." It was not a request. I raised my eyes and found her studying me with an intensity that made me feel stripped bare, as if she could see every secret I had ever kept, every sin I had ever committed. "How far along are you?" she asked, and her voice was calm, utterly without judgment. I opened my mouth to deny it, to claim ignorance, to lie. But something in her expression stopped me. She already knew. Lying would only make things worse. "Nearly 3 months, Your Grace." She nodded, as if I had confirmed something she had long suspected. "And my son is the father." It was not a question, but I answered anyway. "Yes, Your Grace." I waited for the explosion, for the accusations, for the cold dismissal that would cast me out into the winter streets with nothing but the clothes on my back. The Dowager Duchess was not known for her mercy. She had ruled Thornfield with an iron hand for decades, and she did not tolerate scandal. But the explosion did not come. Instead, she rose from her chair and walked to the window, pulling aside the curtain to look out at the barren gardens below, When she spoke again, her voice was different somehow. Softer, touched with something that might have been sorrow. "I was 16 when I first came to this house," she said. "A bride, fresh from my father's estate, terrified of the husband I had met only twice before our wedding day. I thought I knew what my life would be. I thought I understood the rules of the world I was entering." She turned to face me, and in the firelight I saw something in her eyes that I had never expected to see there. Understanding. "I was wrong," she continued, "about so many things. And I have spent the last 40 years watching other women make the same mistakes I made, bound by the same chains, destroyed by the same lies. I am tired of it, Clara. I am tired of pretending that our way of life is just when I know in my heart that it is cruel beyond measure." I did not understand what she was saying. I did not understand why she was telling me this, or what it had to do with my fate. I sat frozen in my chair, afraid to move, afraid to breathe, afraid that any action on my part might shatter whatever strange spell had descended upon this room. The Dowager walked to a small writing desk in the corner and retrieved a folded document, which she brought to me. I took it with trembling hands and opened it to find a deed of property. A cottage in Devonshire, a place called Rosemere. "This belonged to my mother," she said. "It came to me when she died, and I have kept it all these years, though I never had reason to use it. It is modest but comfortable. There is a garden and a small income from tenant farms nearby, enough to live quietly, away from prying eyes." I stared at the document, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. "Your Grace, I do not understand." She sat down across from me again, and this time she reached out and took my hands in hers. Her fingers were cool and thin, the skin papery with age, but her grip was surprisingly strong. "You will leave Thornfield tonight," she said. "You will take a carriage to the village, and from there, a coach to Exeter. One of my most trusted servants will accompany you and see you safely to Rosemere. You will live there, under the name Clara Weston, a respectable widow whose husband died at sea. You will have your child in peace, and you will raise it with dignity. And no one, not my son, not society, not anyone, will ever know the truth unless you choose to tell them." Tears were streaming down my face now, though I had not felt them begin. "Why?" I whispered. "Why would you do this for me?" The Dowager was silent for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Because I know what it is to love someone who cannot love you back," she said. "Because I know what it is to bear the weight of secrets that would destroy you if they came to light. And because I have watched my son become something I do not recognize, something cold and calculating, and I will not let him ruin another life the way his father ruined mine." She released my hands and stood, her composure restored, the momentary vulnerability vanishing behind the mask of the Dowager Duchess. "There is a condition," she added. "You will never contact Edward. You will never tell him about the child. You will disappear from this house and this life as if you never existed. In return, I will ensure that you want for nothing. The cottage is yours, free and clear. I will send money quarterly, enough to live comfortably, and when I die, there will be a sum set aside in trust for the child. My solicitor has already drawn up the papers. I should have asked more questions. I should have demanded to know what secrets she carried. What pain had made her capable of such unexpected generosity? But I was too overwhelmed, too stunned by the sudden reversal of my fortunes. An hour ago, I had been facing ruin. Now I was being offered salvation. "I accept," I said. And then, because it seemed inadequate, because no words could possibly express what I felt, I added, "Thank you, Your Grace. I will never forget your kindness." Something flickered in her eyes, something that looked almost like guilt. "Do not thank me yet, child. The road ahead will not be easy. Loneliness has a weight that few understand until they feel it. But you are stronger than you know. I have watched you these past years, watched you carry yourself with dignity even when others saw only your station. That strength will serve you well." She walked to the door and opened it, signaling that our interview was over. "Go now," she said. "Pack only what you can carry. The carriage will be waiting at the kitchen entrance at midnight." And Clara, she paused, her hand on the door frame, one last piece of advice. Whatever happens, never let anyone make you feel ashamed of the choice you are making. You are saving your child. There is no greater act of love. I left Thornfield Hall that night with a small bag of belongings and a heart full of conflicting emotions. As the carriage rolled down the drive, I looked back at the great house one last time, at the windows glowing with candlelight, at the life I was leaving behind. Somewhere in those halls, Edward was sleeping, unaware that I was gone, unaware that he would soon be a father. Part of me wanted to hate him. Part of me wanted to pound on his door and force him to see what he had done. But the Dowager's words echoed in my mind. Never contact him. Disappear as if you never existed. And so I turned my face toward the dark road ahead and did not look back again. The journey to Devonshire took 3 days, through rain and mud and tiny village inns, where I was treated with the distant courtesy afforded to respectable widows. The Dowager's servant, a woman named Martha, who had served her grace for 30 years, asked no questions and offered no judgments. She simply ensured that I ate, that I rested, that I arrived at my destination safely. Rosemere was everything the Dowager had promised, and nothing I had imagined. A small stone cottage with a thatched roof set at the edge of a village so quiet that the loudest sound was birdsong. There was a garden, overgrown from disuse, and a well, and a hen house with 3 confused chickens who seemed unsure what to make of their new mistress. Inside, the rooms were dusty but sound, filled with old furniture that had belonged to the Dowager's mother, preserved as if waiting for someone to need them. I stood in the center of the main room on that first evening, my hands pressed to my barely swollen belly, and I wept. For what I had lost, for what I had gained, for the child growing inside me who would never know its father, who would grow up believing a lie about a husband who had never existed. But as the tears subsided, something else took their place. A feeling I had not experienced in months, perhaps years. Hope. I was alone. Yes. I was facing an uncertain future with nothing but my own determination to sustain me. But I was free. Free of Thornfield and its suffocating hierarchies. Free of Edward and his empty promises. Free to build a life on my own terms, for myself and for my child. I placed my hand over my heart and made a silent vow. I would survive this. I would create something good from the ashes of my disgrace. And no matter what challenges lay ahead, I would raise my child to know love and kindness and the value of truth. I did not know, as I stood there in the gathering dusk, that years would pass before I understood the full weight of the Dowager's gift. I did not know that the secrets she carried were darker than anything I had imagined. And I did not know that the past I was trying to escape would one day return, bringing with it questions I was not prepared to answer. All I knew was that I had been given a second chance. And I would not waste it. Time, I have learned, is both healer and thief. It steals the sharpness of grief, softening the edges of memories until they no longer cut quite so deeply. But it also takes other things. The sound of a voice you once knew by heart. The exact color of eyes you thought you would never forget. The feeling of hands upon your skin, of breath against your hair, of love that burned so brightly it seemed impossible it could ever fade. In the years that followed my arrival at Rosemere, I allowed time to do its work. I let it dull the pain of Edward's betrayal, let it blur the features of his face in my memory, let it transform my heartbreak into something quieter and more manageable. Not forgiveness, exactly. I do not think I will ever truly forgive him for the way he discarded me, for the coldness with which he erased our love from the narrative of his life. But something like acceptance, an understanding that bitterness would poison only me, that clinging to anger would steal the joy from the new life I was building. And there was joy. More than I had any right to expect. Rose was born on a morning in late May, when the apple trees in the garden were heavy with blossoms and the air smelled of new beginnings. The village midwife, a woman named Mrs. Chadwick, who asked no questions and kept her observations to herself, delivered her safely into my waiting arms. And when I looked down at that tiny face, at the dark hair already curling against her scalp, at the eyes that would later reveal themselves to be the same deep brown as her father's, I understood for the first time why people speak of love as something that can shatter and remake you in the same breath. She was perfect. She was mine. And I would have walked through fire to keep her safe. The early months were difficult in ways I had not anticipated. I had cared for children before, in the nurseries of Thornfield, but there is a vast difference between tending to someone else's infant and being solely responsible for your own. Rose cried through the nights and slept through the days, reversing my sense of time until I no longer knew whether the sun outside my window marked morning or evening. My body ached from the birth and from the constant feeding, from carrying her for hours when nothing else would soothe her, from the bone-deep exhaustion that no amount of sleep could cure. But I was not entirely alone. The Dowager, true to her word, had arranged for support. A local woman named Sarah came each day to help with the cooking and cleaning, asking nothing about my history beyond what I chose to share. The quarterly payments arrived like clockwork, more generous than I had expected, enough to keep us comfortable without excess. And letters came too, brief and formal communications from the Dowager's solicitor informing me that Her Grace inquired after my health and that of the child. I never wrote back directly to her. It seemed too dangerous. Too likely to create a paper trail that might someday lead back to the truth. But I sent my replies through the solicitor, assurances that we were well, that Rose was thriving, that I was grateful beyond measure for everything she had done. The village of Hartwell accepted me without suspicion. I was Mrs. Clara Weston, widow of a merchant sailor, come to the countryside for my health and to raise my child away from the noise and filth of the city. It was a common enough story, and people believed it because they had no reason not to. I dressed modestly, attended church each Sunday, contributed to the charitable works expected of respectable women, and kept largely to myself. In time, the villagers stopped seeing me as a stranger and began to see me simply as one of their own, the quiet widow in the cottage at the edge of the green, whose daughter had the prettiest dark curls in the parish. Rose grew as children do, faster than seemed possible. One moment, she was a helpless infant, dependent on me for everything. The next, she was toddling across the garden on unsteady legs, her laughter ringing out like bells. She spoke her first word at 11 months, Mama, and I wept to hear it, overcome by a love so fierce it frightened me. She was clever from the start, curious about everything, forever asking questions that I struggled to answer. Why is the sky blue, Mama? Where do the birds go when it rains? What happened to my papa? That last question came sooner than I had hoped, posed one evening when she was barely 4 years old, as I brushed her hair before bed. I had prepared for it, had rehearsed my answer countless times in the privacy of my own mind, but nothing could have prepared me for the pain of speaking it aloud. Your papa loved you very much, I told her, keeping my voice steady through sheer force of will. But he was a sailor, and the sea is dangerous. He died before you were born, in a storm far from home. He would have wanted to be here with us more than anything in the world. It was a lie, of course, every word of it. But what else could I tell her? The truth that her father was a duke who had abandoned us both, who did not even know she existed, who would have been horrified to learn of her birth. I could not burden a child with that knowledge. I could not let her grow up believing herself unwanted, a mistake, an absurdity. Better the comforting fiction of a father who had loved her and lost his life than the cruel reality of one who had simply chosen not to care. Rose accepted the story with the unquestioning trust of childhood. She asked to see pictures of her papa, and I showed her a miniature I had found in an antique shop, a portrait of some anonymous gentleman with dark hair and kind eyes, close enough to Edward's coloring that it would not raise suspicions. She kissed it good night each evening and told it about her day, and my heart broke a little more each time I watched her. The years passed. Rose turned 5, then 6, then 7. I found work as a seamstress, supplementing the Dowager's allowance with income of my own, determined to build a foundation that would survive even if the payments stopped. I was good with a needle, always had been, and word spread quickly through the village that Mrs. Weston could mend anything, could create beautiful things from simple cloth, could transform an outdated dress into something fashionable and new. Ladies from the neighboring estates began to seek me out, bringing their damaged gowns and their special requests, and I discovered a satisfaction in the work that I had never found in service. I made friends, too, cautiously at first, then with growing confidence. There was Margaret, the vicar's wife, who shared my love of novels and would lend me books from her husband's library. There was Ellen, the baker's daughter, who had a sharp tongue and a kind heart, and who made me laugh in ways I had forgotten were possible. There was Dr. Ashby, the village physician, a widower himself, who called more often than strictly necessary to check on Rose's health, and who looked at me sometimes with an expression I pretended not to understand. I was not ready for that. I did not know if I would ever be ready. The wound Edward had left was healing, but scars remained, and I could not imagine opening my heart again, could not imagine trusting another man with the fragile thing I had rebuilt from the ruins of my first love. Dr. Ashby was patient and kind, and I valued his friendship, but I could offer him nothing more. Rose started her lessons at the village school when she was 6, joining the other children in the drafty classroom where a stern but fair schoolmistress taught reading and writing and arithmetic. She proved to be an excellent student, quick to learn and eager to please, and I watched her blossom with a pride that sometimes stole my breath. This bright, beautiful girl, so full of life and curiosity, was mine. She was the best thing I had ever done, the one good thing to come from all my mistakes and sorrows. But as she grew, so did her resemblance to her father. It was subtle at first, visible only to my eyes, which knew Edward's features better than I wished to admit. The shape of her jaw, the way her brow furrowed when she was thinking, the particular curve of her smile, quick and slightly crooked, that made my heart constrict every time I saw it. By the time she was 8, the resemblance was unmistakable. She had his coloring, his grace, his way of tilting her head when she was listening carefully. She was Edward's daughter in every line, and I lived in constant fear that someone would notice, that some traveler from the north would pass through our village and see in her face the echo of the Duke of Ashworth. I told myself the fear was irrational. Edward did not know Rose existed. He had no reason to look for her, no cause to suspect that I had borne his child. The Dowager had kept our secret faithfully, and the distance between Devonshire and Thornfield Hall was vast, both in miles and in social standing. What were the chances that anyone from that world would ever find their way to our quiet village? The answer, as it turned out, was higher than I had imagined. It happened on an autumn afternoon when Rose was nearly 9 years old. The leaves were turning, just as they had been on the night Edward told me our love was a mistake, and there was a chill in the air that made me pull my shawl tighter as I worked in the garden. Rose was playing nearby, building a house of sticks for her dolls, chattering happily to herself in the way she had since she was tiny. I was thinking about dinner, about the mending I still had to finish, about nothing in particular, when the sound of hooves on the lane made me look up. A carriage was approaching. Not the farm carts and simple gigs that were common in our village, but a proper carriage, black and polished, drawn by matched horses that gleamed in the afternoon light. It was the kind of carriage I had seen 100 times at Thornfield, the kind that belonged to nobility, to people of wealth and consequence. My first thought was that something had happened to the Dowager, that she had died, perhaps, and her solicitor had come to deliver the news in person. I set down my gardening tools and wiped my hands on my apron, preparing myself for whatever blow was about to fall. The carriage stopped at our gate. A footman descended and opened the door, and the man who stepped out was not a solicitor at all. It was Edward. I do not know how long I stood there, frozen, unable to breathe or move or think. He was older than I remembered, lines of care etched around his eyes and mouth that had not been there before. His dark hair was touched with gray at the temples, and he carried himself differently, with a weight and weariness that spoke of sorrows I could not guess. But it was unmistakably him, the man who had held me in the winter garden, the man who had called our love a mistake, the man whose face I saw every day in our daughter's features. He had not seen me yet. His eyes were fixed on the cottage, taking in its modest dimensions, its thatched roof and climbing roses, and the garden that had become my pride and joy. And then his gaze swept across the yard, and he saw Rose. She had stopped her play and was staring at the carriage with wide, curious eyes. Her dark hair was loose around her shoulders, tangled from her games, and her dress was smudged with dirt from the garden. She looked nothing like the polished children of the aristocracy, but the resemblance, that damnable resemblance, was written in every line of her face. Edward went very still. I saw the moment recognition dawned, saw the color drain from his face, saw his hand reach out to grip the carriage door as if he needed it to remain standing. His eyes moved from Rose to me, and in them I saw shock, disbelief, and something else, something that looked almost like pain. "Clara," he said, and his voice cracked on my name. "Rose," I said, surprised by how calm I sounded when everything inside me was screaming. "Go inside, please. Now." She was a good girl, my Rose, obedient when it mattered. She gathered her dolls and her sticks and ran to the cottage door, casting one curious glance over her shoulder before disappearing inside. Only when I heard the door close behind her did I allow myself to look at Edward again. He had taken several steps toward me and then stopped, as if uncertain of his welcome. His face was a mask of conflicting emotions, and his hands, those hands that had once traced patterns of love across my skin, were trembling at his sides. "Is she mine?" he asked, and his voice was barely a whisper. The question was absurd. The answer was written in Rose's face, in her eyes, in every feature that mirrored his own. He knew. He had known the moment he saw her. But I was not ready to give him that truth. Not yet, not after everything he had done. "Why are you here?" I demanded, and I did not bother to hide the anger in my voice. "How did you find us?" He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made my chest ache. "My mother," he said. She passed away 3 months ago. I found letters in her effects, a deed to this property, payments made quarterly to a solicitor in Exeter. I did not understand at first, but then I started asking questions and—" He broke off, his voice failing him. I watched him struggle for composure, watched the muscles in his jaw work as he fought to control himself. "She never told me," he finally managed. "All these years, she knew, and she never said a word. Because she knew what you would do," I replied, and the bitterness surprised even me. "She knew you would try to manage the situation, to make it disappear, just as you made me disappear." "That is not," he began, but I cut him off. "Is it not? You told me I was a mistake, Edward, a passing fancy, an absurdity. Did you think I would forget? Did you think those words did not burn themselves into my heart for all time?" He flinched as if I had struck him. "I was young and stupid and terrified," he said. "My father had just arranged my engagement. The weight of the entire family was pressing down on me. I did not know how to. I could not see any way to." "You could have fought for us," I said, and to my horror, I felt tears beginning to burn behind my eyes. I had sworn I would never cry for him again, and here I was, breaking that promise within minutes of seeing his face. You could have stood up to them. You could have chosen love instead of duty. You think I have not thought of that every day since? His voice rose, raw with emotion. You think I have not lived with the regret of that night, the knowledge of what I threw away. I was a coward, Clara. I know that. I have always known it. He took another step toward me, and I retreated instinctively, keeping distance between us. But I am here now, he continued, his eyes pleading. I know it is too late for apologies. I know I can never undo what I did. But I had to see you. I had to know if the child was. The child has a name, I snapped. Her name is Rose, and she does not know you exist. She believes her father was a sailor who died before she was born. Understanding flickered in his eyes, followed by fresh pain. You created a fiction for her. I created a protection for her. A better story than the truth. That her father abandoned her mother before she was even conceived in his mind. That he called her an absurdity before she drew her first breath. I did not know about her, Edward said, and there were tears on his face now, tears that he made no effort to hide. God, Clara, I swear to you I did not know. If I had known, I would have. You would have what? Married me? Left your precious Lady Beatrice and scandalized your entire family for a servant girl and her bastard child. The word hung in the air between us, ugly and sharp. Edward closed his eyes as if I had wounded him. Beatrice is dead, he said quietly. She died 2 years ago, in childbirth. The baby did not survive either. I had not expected that, had not prepared myself for the possibility that his life might have held its own tragedies, its own losses. For a moment, the anger drained out of me, replaced by something softer and more complicated. I am sorry, I heard myself say, and I meant it. Whatever had passed between us, I did not wish that kind of pain on anyone. He opened his eyes and looked at me, and in his gaze I saw the ghost of the young man I had loved, buried beneath years of grief and regret. I have spent the last 2 years alone with my guilt, he said, mourning a wife I respected but never truly loved, wondering what became of the only woman who ever made me feel alive. And now I find that I have a daughter, a child who does not know me, a piece of you and me that has been growing up in the world without any knowledge of who she really is. He gestured toward the cottage, where I knew Rose was likely watching from the window, her curiosity far too strong to be contained. Please, he said, let me meet her. Let me try to make amends, however inadequate. I am not asking for forgiveness. I know I do not deserve it. But she is my blood, Clara. She is the only family I have left. I looked at him, this man who had broken my heart and then unknowingly given me the greatest gift of my life. I thought of Rose, of the questions she would ask, of the way her world would change if she learned the truth. I thought of the life I had built, the peace I had found, and how easily it could all be shattered by his presence. But I also thought of the miniature portrait beside her bed, of the stories I had told her about a father who loved her, and I knew that I could not send him away. Not without giving Rose the chance to know the truth, to decide for herself what she wanted. You will not lie to her, I said finally. If you stay, if you meet her, you will tell her the truth. All of it. And you will let her decide whether she wants anything to do with you. He nodded, his expression solemn. I would expect nothing less. And you will not take her from me. I do not care who you are or what power you have. She is my daughter. This is her home. If you try to claim her, I will fight you with everything I have. I do not want to take her from you, he said softly. I only want the chance to know her. And perhaps, if she will have me, the chance to be some part of her life. I stood there in the garden, the autumn wind catching at my hair, looking at the man who had once been my whole world. And I made a decision that would change everything. Come inside, I said. There is someone you need to meet. And I turned and walked toward the cottage, hearing his footsteps follow behind me, not knowing if I was making the biggest mistake of my life or finally, after all these years, finding my way towards something like peace. There are moments that divide a life into before and after, and watching Edward meet our daughter was one of them. Rose was standing by the fireplace when we entered, her curiosity having overcome her obedience. She had attempted to tidy herself, I could see, smoothing her hair with her fingers and brushing the worst of the dirt from her dress. But she was still very much the wild child of the countryside, so different from the polished young ladies Edward must have known in his world. She looked at him with her father's eyes, unafraid, assessing, waiting to see what this stranger would do. Edward stopped just inside the doorway. I watched him take her in, every detail, the curve of her cheek and the set of her shoulders, and the way she stood with her chin lifted, defiant and proud. His breath caught audibly, and his hand found the wall beside him, steadying himself against something I could not see. "Rose," I said, keeping my voice gentle despite the chaos raging inside me. "This is," I faltered, unsure how to introduce him. What words could possibly encompass what he was to her, to us? But Edward saved me the trouble. He stepped forward, then stopped himself, dropping to one knee so that he was at her level. His eyes never left her face. "Hello, Rose," he said, and his voice was thick with emotion he was struggling to control. "My name is Edward. I knew your mother a long time ago before you were born." Rose looked at me, seeking guidance, and I nodded. It was all I could do. My throat had closed around whatever words I might have spoken. She turned back to Edward, studying him with the frank curiosity of childhood. "You look sad," she observed. "Are you crying?" He laughed, a broken sound that was half sob. "Perhaps I am," he admitted. "You see, I have been looking for someone for a very long time, someone I lost because I was foolish and afraid. And now I have found her, and she is even more wonderful than I could have imagined." Rose considered this. She tilted her head, that gesture so like his own, and her brow furrowed in thought. "Are you talking about Mama?" Edward glanced at me, his eyes asking permission. I gave another small nod, though my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might break through my chest. "Yes," he said softly. "I am talking about your Mama, but I am also talking about you, Rose." "Me." She was genuinely puzzled now. "But we have never met before. How could you be looking for me?" This was the moment, the truth that would change everything. I wanted to stop it, to gather Rose in my arms and run, to protect her from the complicated reality of her origins. But I had promised Edward he could tell her the truth. And more than that, I knew she deserved to hear it. She was old enough to understand, old enough to make her own choices about what this man would mean to her. Edward took a deep breath. "Because," he said carefully, "a long time ago, before you were born, your Mama and I loved each other very much, but I made a terrible mistake. I let other people convince me that our love was wrong, and I went away without knowing that you were going to be born. Your Mama had to raise you all alone, without any help from me, because I was not brave enough to fight for what mattered." Rose's eyes went wide. She looked at me again, seeking confirmation, and I felt tears spilling down my cheeks as I nodded. "But Mama said my papa was a sailor," Rose said, her voice small and confused. "She said he died in a storm." "I know, sweetheart." I moved to her side and knelt beside Edward, the three of us forming a strange tableau in my small sitting room. "I told you that story because I wanted to protect you. I did not want you to grow up thinking your father did not love you. But the truth is more complicated. Your father did not know about you. He only just found out today, and he came as soon as he could." Rose was silent for a long moment, processing this information with a gravity that seemed too old for her years. When she finally spoke, her question cut straight to the heart of everything. "Did you not want me?" Edward made a sound like a wounded animal. "Oh, Rose," he breathed. No, that is not it at all. I did not know you existed. If I had known, I would have moved heaven and earth to be with you. I would have given up everything. But you left Mama, Rose pressed, her child's logic following the thread to its conclusion. You said you made a mistake. You left her alone. Yes, Edward admitted, and the word seemed to cost him everything. I left her. I was wrong, and I was cowardly, and I have regretted it every single day since. I cannot change the past, Rose. I cannot give you back the years I should have been here. But I am here now, and I want more than anything to be part of your life, if you will let me. Rose looked at him, really looked at him, with those dark eyes that were so completely his. Then she turned to me. Mama, she said, is this why I do not have a papa's picture? Is this why you cry sometimes when you think I am asleep? The question shattered me. I had not known she had heard me. I had tried so hard to keep my grief private, to shield her from the weight of my sorrow. But children see more than we imagine. They understand more than we give them credit for. Yes, sweetheart, I whispered. This is why. Rose was quiet again, thinking. Then, with the decisiveness that had always been her nature, she turned back to Edward. If you are my papa, she said slowly, does that mean you are a sailor too? Despite everything, I almost laughed. Of all the questions she might have asked, that was not one I had anticipated. Edward smiled, though tears were still tracking down his face. No, he said. I am afraid I am not very good on boats at all. I am actually a duke. Do you know what that is? Rose's eyes went wide. Like in the stories? With a big house and servants and horses? Something like that, Edward agreed. Would you like to hear about it? She nodded eagerly. And just like that, the tension in the room shifted. Edward began to tell her about Thornfield Hall, about the horses in the stables and the gardens where peacocks roamed, about the library with its thousands of books, and the portrait gallery where the faces of his ancestors looked down from gilded frames. Rose listened with rapt attention, asking questions, exclaiming over details, gradually moving closer to this stranger who was not a stranger at all. I sat back and watched them, my heart a tangled knot of emotions I could not begin to unravel. There was fear, yes, fear of what this would mean for our quiet life, fear of the changes that would surely follow. There was anger, still simmering beneath the surface, at the years he had stolen from us, at the pain he had caused with his cowardice. But there was something else, too, something that looked almost like hope. Rose deserved to know her father. She deserved to have more than a fiction, a painted miniature, and a story about storms at sea. And watching Edward with her, seeing the wonder in his eyes and the tenderness in his voice, I began to believe that perhaps he truly had changed. Perhaps the man before me was not the same one who had broken my heart all those years ago. The afternoon passed in a blur of conversation and discovery. Edward stayed for dinner, a simple meal of soup and bread that I apologized for profusely, until he stopped me with a look that said more than words ever could. Rose showed him her room, her toys, the garden where she played, chattering all the while about her life, her friends, her lessons at school. She asked him questions too, about his own childhood, about whether he had any brothers or sisters, about why he had not come to find them sooner. He answered everything honestly, even the painful things. He told her about his father, stern and demanding, who had raised him to believe that duty mattered more than love. He told her about his mother, the Dowager, who had kept our secret even as it must have tormented her to watch her son live in ignorance. He told her about Lady Beatrice, the wife he had married because it was expected of him, and about the grief of losing her even though he had never loved her the way he should have. Rose listened to it all with solemn attention, and when Edward finally said that he should go, that he was staying at an inn in the next village and would return tomorrow if she would have him, she did something that surprised us both. She hugged him. It was a quick embrace, a child's impulsive gesture, but I saw the way it undid him completely. He wrapped his arms around her as if she were made of glass, as if he was afraid she might disappear if he held too tightly. and when she pulled back and ran off to prepare for bed, he remained where he was, on his knees on the floor of my sitting room, his face buried in his hands. I should have felt vindicated. I should have felt satisfied to see him brought low, to watch him suffer even a fraction of what I had suffered. But all I felt was a vast and aching sorrow for all of us, for the years we had lost, for the family we might have been. "Edward," I said softly. He looked up at me, his eyes red, his composure completely gone. "She is magnificent," he said. "Clara, she is absolutely magnificent. How did you do it? How did you raise such a child, alone, with no help, no support?" "I had help," I reminded him. "Your mother saw to that." He shook his head. "The cottage, the money, those are just things. But you gave her everything else. Her kindness, her courage, her curiosity, that is all you." I did not know what to say. I had never expected to hear such words from him, never imagined that we would have this conversation. I stood there, caught between past and present, between the girl I had been and the woman I had become. "You should go," I finally managed. "It is getting late, and Rose needs her sleep." He rose to his feet, brushing off his trousers, composing himself with visible effort. "I will return tomorrow," he said, "if that is acceptable. Rose would be disappointed if you did not." He nodded, then hesitated at the door. "Clara," he said, "I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but I need you to know that I never stopped loving you, not for a single day. I tried. God knows I tried. But you were always there, in my mind, in my heart, the ghost of what might have been, if I had only been brave enough." I closed my eyes against the pain his words caused. "Please do not. I am not asking for anything," he continued. "I am not trying to manipulate you or win you back. I only want you to know the truth. Whatever happens from here, whatever you decide about my place in Rose's life, I need you to know that what we had was real. It was the most real thing I have ever experienced, and losing it was my greatest regret." He left before I could respond, the door closing softly behind him, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the echo of his words. That night, after Rose was asleep, I sat by the fire and tried to make sense of everything that had happened. The man who had appeared at my gate that afternoon was not the Edward I remembered. He was softer, more vulnerable, stripped of the arrogance and certainty that had once defined him. Life had humbled him, it seemed. Loss had taught him lessons that he had been too proud to learn when he was young. But could I trust him? Could I allow him into our lives, knowing what he was capable of, knowing how thoroughly he had destroyed me once before? I thought about Rose, about the joy in her face as she showed him her garden, about the way she had hugged him without reservation. She had accepted him so easily. This father she had never known. Children were like that, I supposed. They did not carry the weight of history the way adults did. They could forgive without forgetting, love without condition, open their hearts without fear. I had taught her to be that way. I had raised her to believe in kindness, in second chances, in the possibility of redemption. Could I now deny those very principles when they were tested against my own wounds? The questions circled in my mind until exhaustion finally claimed me, and I fell asleep in my chair by the dying fire, dreaming of winter gardens and whispered promises and the sound of Rose's laughter echoing through halls I had never thought to see again. Edward returned the next morning, as promised, and the morning after that, and the one after that. For 2 weeks, he came to our cottage every day, spending hours with Rose, getting to know her, building a connection that seemed to grow stronger with each passing day. He brought her gifts, small things at first, a ribbon for her hair, a book of fairy tales, a carved wooden horse from the village market. Later, larger things, a pony, stabled at a nearby farm, a beautiful dress, finer than anything she had ever owned, which she wore to church the following Sunday with undisguised pride. The village noticed, of course. They whispered about the elegant stranger who visited the widow Weston, about the expensive gifts, about the resemblance between the man and the child that became more apparent with every passing day. I heard the gossip and chose to ignore it. Let them speculate, let them wonder. The truth was more complicated than they could ever imagine. Through it all, Edward and I maintained a careful distance. We spoke only about Rose, about practical matters, about the logistics of his visits. We did not discuss the past, did not revisit the words he had spoken that first night, did not acknowledge the tension that hummed between us whenever our eyes met. It was as if we had drawn an invisible line, and neither of us dared to cross it. But some lines are drawn only to be crossed. It happened on the 14th night of his visits, after Rose had gone to bed and Edward was preparing to leave. I walked him to the door, as I always did, and we paused in the entrance, the cool night air drifting in from outside. "Thank you," he said, "for letting me be part of her life. I know it cannot have been easy for you." "She is happy," I replied. "That is what matters." He nodded, but he did not move to leave. Instead, he stood there, looking at me with an intensity that made my breath catch. "Clara," he said, "there is something I need to say to you, something I should have said years ago. Edward, please. No." He took a step closer, and suddenly the space between us felt impossibly small. I have spent 15 years regretting my cowardice, 15 years wishing I could go back and make a different choice. I cannot change what I did, but I can tell you now what I should have told you then. He reached out and took my hand in his, and the touch sent a shock through my entire body. I should have pulled away. I should have reminded him of all the reasons why this was impossible. But I did not move. "I love you," he said simply. "I loved you then, and I love you now. I loved you when I was fool enough to let you go, and I loved you every day of my empty marriage, and I loved you in the years since Beatrice died, when I was alone with nothing but my regrets. You are the only woman I have ever truly loved, and I will spend the rest of my life proving it to you if you will give me the chance." I stared at him, my heart racing, my mind spinning. Part of me wanted to fall into his arms, to surrender to the love that had never truly died, to let him hold me the way he had all those years ago. But another part, the part that remembered the pain, that remembered kneeling in the dirt of my garden while my world fell apart, that part held back. "You broke me," I whispered. "You broke me, Edward, and I do not know if I can survive being broken again." "I know," he said, and his voice cracked. "I know, and I am so sorry, but I am not the same man I was. I have learned, Clara. I have suffered. I understand now what matters, what is worth fighting for, and I am asking you, begging you to let me try. Not now, not tomorrow, but someday. Give me time to prove that I have changed. Give me the chance to earn your trust again." He released my hand and stepped back, giving me space. "I am not going anywhere," he said. "However long it takes, I will wait." And then he was gone, disappearing into the darkness, leaving me standing in my doorway with his words echoing in my heart. I closed the door and leaned against it, trembling. Somewhere in the depths of my soul, buried beneath years of grief and anger and carefully constructed walls, something stirred, something that felt dangerously like hope. Forgiveness, I have come to understand, is not a single moment, but a journey. It is not the flash of lightning that illuminates the sky and then vanishes. It is the slow creep of dawn, gradual and relentless, pushing back the darkness one shade at a time until you find yourself standing in full daylight, wondering when exactly the night ended. In the weeks that followed Edward's declaration, I began that journey without consciously choosing to take the first step. I watched him with Rose, saw the patience with which he answered her endless questions, the gentleness with which he taught her to ride her new pony, the pride that shone in his eyes when she mastered a difficult passage in her reading. I watched him in my home, helping to carry in firewood without being asked, complimenting my cooking with genuine appreciation, treating my modest cottage not as beneath him, but as a sanctuary, a place where he could shed the weight of his title and simply be a man. And slowly, so slowly that I barely noticed it happening, the walls I had built around my heart began to crack. It was Rose who first put words to what was happening. We were in the garden on a bright November morning, she and I, gathering the last of the autumn vegetables before the frost claimed them. Edward had gone to the village on some errand, and we had the rare luxury of time alone together. "Mama," she said, her small hands busy with the carrots she was pulling from the earth. "Do you still love him?" I paused in my work, startled by the directness of the question. Rose had always been perceptive, but this felt like something more, an understanding beyond her years. "Why do you ask, sweetheart?" She shrugged, that particular gesture of childhood that meant everything and nothing at once. "Because of the way you look at him. It is the same way Margaret looks at Reverend Peters, and you were in love with him once, before. So I wondered if you still were." I sat back on my heels, considering how to answer. Rose deserved honesty, always. I had made that promise to myself when I agreed to let Edward into our lives. "Love is complicated," I said carefully, "especially when someone has hurt you. Part of me still cares for your father very much, but another part remembers the pain, and that makes it difficult to trust those feelings." Rose nodded sagely. "But he is different now, is he not? He is kind and good, and he makes you smile sometimes, even when you are trying not to." I could not help but laugh at her observation. Out of the mouths of babes, as the saying went. "Yes," I admitted. "He does seem different." "Then maybe," Rose said, with the simple logic that only children possess, "maybe the part of you that remembers the pain could learn to remember the good things too. The way he is now, not the way he was then." She returned to her carrots, apparently satisfied with her contribution to the conversation, leaving me to sit in the dirt and contemplate the wisdom of a 9-year-old girl. That evening, when Edward returned from the village, I found myself watching him with new eyes. He had brought gifts, as he often did, but not the extravagant presents of his first visits. A bundle of ribbons for Rose in her favorite colors. A package of tea for me, the kind I had once mentioned preferring, but could rarely afford. Small things, thoughtful things. The gifts of a man who paid attention, who wanted to please not through wealth, but through care. He caught me watching him and smiled, that slightly crooked smile that Rose had inherited, and something shifted in my chest. Something that felt like a key turning in a lock that had been closed for far too long. After Rose went to bed that night, I asked him to stay. We sat by the fire, a careful distance between us, and for a long time, neither of us spoke. The flames crackled and popped, casting dancing shadows across the walls, and I thought about all the words that had remained unspoken between us, all the questions I had been too proud or too frightened to ask. "Tell me about your mother," I finally said. "Tell me why she helped me, when she had every reason not to." Edward was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on the fire. When he spoke, his voice was soft, contemplative. "My mother was not the woman people believed her to be," he said. "The world saw the Dowager Duchess, cold and imperious, guardian of propriety and tradition. But that was armor, Clara. She wore it to survive a marriage that gave her everything except what she truly wanted." "What did she want?" He turned to look at me, and in his eyes I saw shadows of old grief. "She wanted love. She was married to my father when she was barely 17, a political alliance between families. He was not cruel to her, not in ways that would be recognized as such, but he was indifferent. She was a means to an heir, nothing more. He kept mistresses openly, humiliated her at every turn, and she bore it all with perfect composure because that was what was expected of her. I thought of the woman who had sat across from me in her private chambers, who had spoken of knowing what it was to love someone who could not love her back. I had not understood then, but I was beginning to understand now. She had a child before me, Edward continued. A daughter, born in the 3rd year of her marriage. My father was furious. He wanted a son, an heir. He blamed her for the child's sex, as if she had any control over such things. And when the baby died of fever at 6 months old, he did not even attend the funeral. Oh, Edward. My heart ached for the woman I had feared, the woman who had saved me. She never recovered from that loss, he said. Not truly, she went on. She had me, she played her role perfectly, but something inside her was broken. I think, when she learned about you, about your condition, she saw a chance to save someone the way she had not been able to save herself. Or perhaps to save the grandchild she would never publicly acknowledge. The quarterly payments, I murmured. The letters from the solicitor. She was watching over us all along. She loved you, Edward said simply. Both of you. She told me so, in the letter I found among her effects. She wrote that sending you away was the hardest thing she ever did, but also the best. That knowing you were safe and happy was the only comfort of her final years. Tears were streaming down my face now, tears for the Dowager, for myself, for all the tangled threads of love and loss that had woven our lives together. I wish I could have thanked her, I whispered. I wish I could have told her what her kindness meant to me. Edward reached across the space between us and took my hand. She knew, he said. She always knew. We sat there in the firelight, hands clasped, and something passed between us that I cannot adequately describe. An understanding, a healing, the first true step on the road toward forgiveness. I am not ready yet, I told him, because he deserved to know where I stood. I am not ready to be your wife or your anything beyond what we are now. He squeezed my hand gently. I know, but I am willing to try, to let you prove yourself, to see if what we had can be rebuilt on a stronger foundation. His eyes shone with emotion. That is all I ask. He left that night without kissing me, without pushing for more than I was willing to give, and in his restraint I saw more evidence of his change than any words could have provided. The weeks turned to months. Winter settled over Devonshire in a blanket of frost and early darkness, and Edward settled into our lives with a permanence that no longer frightened me. He rented a small house in the village, close enough to visit daily, but far enough to respect my boundaries. He became a fixture at our dinner table, at Rose's riding lessons, at Sunday services where the villagers had long since stopped whispering about the elegant stranger who so clearly adored the widow Weston. And somewhere in the midst of that cold, quiet winter, I fell in love with him again. It was not the wild, consuming passion of our youth. That fire had burned too hot, too fast, leaving only ashes in its wake. This was something different, deeper. A love built on shared meals and quiet conversations, on watching him teach our daughter to dance in my small sitting room, on the way he looked at me when he thought I was not watching, with a tenderness that made my breath catch. I did not tell him, not yet. I was still learning to trust these feelings, still testing the ground beneath my feet to make sure it would hold. But I let myself lean into them, just a little. I let myself imagine a future that included him, a life where Rose would have both parents, where I would have a partner to share my joys and sorrows. Spring came early that year, the gardens bursting into bloom before March had ended. Rose turned 10, and Edward threw her a birthday celebration, the likes of which our village had never seen, with games and sweets and a troupe of traveling musicians who played until the stars came out. She fell asleep that night with a smile on her face, clutching the porcelain doll he had given her, and I stood in her doorway, watching her breathe, overwhelmed by gratitude for this life I had never dared to imagine. Edward found me there a few minutes later. He stood beside me, looking at our daughter, and when he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Thank you," he said. "For what? For her. For this. For giving me a second chance when I deserved nothing of the kind." I turned to face him, and in the dim light of the hallway, I saw everything I had been afraid to hope for reflected in his eyes. Love, commitment, a future that stretched out before us, uncertain but full of possibility. "I love you," I said. The words came out before I could stop them, before I could second-guess myself, and once they were spoken, I did not want to take them back. "I love you, Edward. I think I never stopped, even when I hated you, even when I wanted to forget you ever existed. You have been a part of me since that first night in the storm, and you always will be." He made a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and then his arms were around me, and he was holding me the way he had all those years ago, as if I were the most precious thing in the world. "I love you," he murmured against my hair. "God, Clara, I love you so much. I will spend every day of the rest of my life making sure you never regret this." He kissed me then, there in the hallway outside our daughter's room, and it was nothing like the kisses of our youth. It was better. It was a promise, a covenant, a beginning rather than an ending. We were married in June in the small village church where I had worshipped for nearly a decade. It was not the grand society wedding that a duke might have been expected to have. There were no lords and ladies, no glittering aristocrats, no pages devoted to us in the London papers. There was only Edward and me, and Rose standing between us as a flower girl, and the friends I had made in my years of exile, the people who had accepted me without question and who now rejoiced in my happiness. The vicar who performed the ceremony was the same man whose wife had lent me books through all my lonely winters. The baker's daughter, who had made me laugh when I thought I would never laugh again, stood as my witness. Dr. Ashby was there too, and if there was a shadow of regret in his eyes, he hid it well beneath genuine well-wishes. Afterward, we had a simple reception in the garden of my cottage, which would soon no longer be my cottage at all. Edward had asked me to return to Thornfield with him, to take my place as Duchess, to give Rose the life she was entitled to by birth. I had agreed, with conditions. The cottage would be preserved, maintained as a retreat for whenever the pressures of society became too much. Rose would finish the school year with her friends before we departed, and I would never, ever be asked to pretend that my years here had been anything but a blessing. He had agreed to everything without hesitation. He would have agreed to anything, I think, to have me by his side. The night before we left for Thornfield, I walked through the cottage one last time, touching the walls that had sheltered me, the furniture that had comforted me, the garden where Rose had taken her first steps. This place had saved me. The Dowager's gift had given me space to heal, to grow, to become the woman I was today. I would carry it with me always, no matter how grand my new home might be. Edward found me in the garden as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. He wrapped his arms around me from behind and rested his chin on my shoulder, and we stood there together, watching the day end. "Are you ready?" he asked. I thought about everything I was leaving behind, the quiet life, the anonymity, the freedom of being no one in particular, and I thought about everything I was gaining, a husband who loved me, a family united at last, a future I had once thought impossible. "Yes," I said, "I am ready." The journey to Thornfield took 3 days, just as it had all those years ago when I had fled in the opposite direction. But this time I was not alone in a carriage with a taciturn servant. This time I had Edward beside me and Rose across from me, her face pressed to the window as she watched the countryside roll by. When we finally arrived, when the great house came into view at the end of the long drive, I felt something I had not expected, not fear, not anxiety, not even the bittersweet nostalgia I had anticipated. I felt like I was coming home. The staff lined up to greet us, just as they had once lined up to greet Edward when he returned from his grand tour, but this time the faces were friendly, the welcomes genuine. Mrs. Bramwell, older now and stooped with age, wept openly when she saw me. The footman bowed, the housemaids curtsied, and when Edward introduced me as his Duchess, There was not a trace of judgment in anyone's eyes. We walked into the entrance hall together, the three of us, and I looked up at the grand staircase, at the portraits of Ashworth ancestors, at the life that was now mine. "Welcome home, Mama," Rose said, squeezing my hand. "Welcome home." That night, after Rose was settled in the nursery that had once been Edward's, after the household had retired and the great house had fallen silent, I stood at the window of the chamber I now shared with my husband and looked out at the moonlit gardens below. The winter garden was there, visible in the distance, the glass walls gleaming like silver. I thought of all the nights I had crept through those doors, heart pounding, to meet a man I loved in secret. Edward came to stand beside me, following my gaze. "I had it renovated," he said quietly, "after you left." I could not bear to see it the way it was, but I could not bear to destroy it either. It is different now. New plants, new arrangements, but the bones are the same. I leaned into him, letting him take my weight. "We should visit it," I said, "make new memories to go with the old." He pressed a kiss to my temple. "Tomorrow." "Tomorrow," I agreed. We stood there together in the moonlight, looking out at the gardens, at the past, at the future that stretched before us. And I thought about the journey that had brought me here. The love, the betrayal, the loneliness, and the hope. The gift of a cottage, the gift of a child, the gift of a second chance. The Dowager had been right all those years ago. Loneliness had a weight that few understood until they felt it. But so did love. So did forgiveness. So did the courage to open your heart again after it had been shattered. I had carried all of those weights, and I had survived. More than survived. I had built a life worth living, raised a daughter worth knowing, become a woman worth loving. And now, at last, I was home. Edward turned me in his arms and kissed me, slow and sweet, and I let myself sink into him completely, holding nothing back. The girl who had once dusted shelves in this very house was gone. In her place stood the Duchess of Ashworth, a woman who had earned her happiness through fire and tears, who had learned that love could be lost and found again, who knew now that the greatest courage was not in protecting your heart, but in opening it, again and again, despite the risk. "I love you," I whispered against his lips. He smiled, that crooked smile that I saw every day in our daughter's face. "And I love you," he replied, "always and forever." Outside, the moon rose higher over the gardens of Thornfield Hall. Inside, I let my husband lead me to the bed that would be ours, and I let myself finally, fully, believe in happily ever after. For all the years that followed, through joy and sorrow, through Rose's coming out and her marriage to a young man who loved her the way Edward loved me, through grandchildren and gray hair and the slow accumulation of a life well lived, I never forgot the lesson the Dowager taught me when she pressed that deed into my trembling hands. Sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places. Sometimes the people we fear the most turn out to be the ones who save us. And sometimes, if we are brave enough to accept it, we are given not just one chance at happiness, but two. I was given 2 chances, and I would be grateful for both of them until my very last breath.